everyone, and welcome to this session on fast charging at Eurelectric's Power Summit 2021. My name is Julia Poliskanova, and I am Senior Director for Vehicles with Transport and Environment, and I am very happy to be moderating this session with you today. We are really living exciting times at the moment, not because we are, of course, stuck at home, but restrictions are easing, so life is much better, but because electrification today really is on the climate, industrial and economic agenda of Europe. Propelled by both policies, but also recovery support, electric cars have been booming and the sales have actually tripled last year and continue to grow. Last time I checked, 14% of all sales across Europe recently had a plug, and we are well in the lead in this globally. And actually, we woke to 2021 also having a lot of good news. We have a lot of voluntary commitments from the car industry, Volvo Cars, General Motors, Ford Europe, all promising to go 100% for electrification. But when we talk to people on the ground and we ask, why haven't you bought an electric car yet? Many people still say that they either lack access to a charging point or they simply find it too complicated and too difficult to access and to use them. And because we live in a way where we don't just stay at home, most charging will happen at home or at work, but we like to travel around, so we want to have charging across motorways, and hopefully we can all be starting to plan our travel for the summer because we don't like to stay at home and we go to see our friends and to restaurants. It's really, really important to have fast charging network all across Europe to enable us all to continue living hassle-free, traveling hassle-free, while also driving our cars as we do with conventional cars today. And it is very, very critical moment at the moment when the European Commission is bringing their climate and energy package of a generation forward this summer. I'm very delighted to welcome today an established panel of speakers, leading policymakers, leading companies, to discuss with them what role does fast charging and ultra-fast charging have in the uptake of electric vehicles. So without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to our keynote speaker first of all. So I'd like to welcome Elena Rodriguez, who is Head of E-Mobility at Ormazabal, to take us through her presentation.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Julia, for your kind introduction. Before coming to the topic that has gathered us today, let me please share with you a couple of data about Ormazabal. We are part of Velatia. Velatia is a family-run industrial technological group of companies that offer advanced solutions that allow the smartization of the cities, from telecommunication networks to energy efficiency or electrical networks. Within Velatia, Ormazabal, we are the experts in customized, reliable, and high-tech solutions for the electrical infrastructure. For example, we have been supporting leading utilities in the world in the development of the distribution networks. The last 15 years of them, of our more than 50 years of experience, we have been supporting them in the digitalization of the distribution grid. Also, we are present in the renewable energy generation sector for more than 25 years now. And nowadays, more than 100 gigawatts of renewable generation is operated and automated through our solutions. We are also in the sector of the smart infrastructures, especially when it comes about critical infrastructures such as data centers, hospitals, airports, or greening ports around the world. If we talk about electromobility, we are supporting the most important charging point operators in Europe and abroad in the uptake of sustainable mobility. All this make us proud of sharing with you a sample of our customers that are present in all these sectors, and that many of them have been, we have been collaborating with them for years already. Coming back to today's focus, I would like first to raise your attention to the size of the challenge we have ahead in Europe regarding public charging infrastructure deployment. This challenge, it's important for all kind of charging, of normal charging or slow charging, but it becomes especially important when it comes to fast and ultra-fast charging. However, why do we need ultra-fast charging? As Julia was saying at the beginning, a majority of the charging is taking place at the private houses of the drivers. There are several reasons. The first I would like to say or to highlight is the fact that we, in Europe, usually households, they have just one single private car. If we take the data for the European Automobile Manufacturers Association, for the countries where this data is available, we find that France is the country where more households have 2 or more cars. And this figure is around 35% of the French households. So indeed, the majority of the European households, they have a car. And they want it for everything, for commuting, but also for traveling. A second reason why fast charging is required is that also majority of the Europeans will live in cities. And although differences are, or there are differences in between the different countries in Europe, many of us, we live in flats. At some of those flats, there is no private parking lots. Therefore, we don't have access to private, or many European citizens, they don't have access to private charging facilities. Therefore, we could say they could rely on work charging or commercial charging at the malls or the cinemas or wherever. But why not to have a suburban network of fast and ultra-fast charging stations where drivers could use in the way they fill their tank nowadays. Another reason why is that also in the cities we have taxis, shared services, delivery vans that also definitely they count. These ones, they count in general with private charging at their depots. However, it is true also that they may need to top up their batteries during their journey without wasting time at the charging station. Last but not least, we have the road freight. Vans and trucks that, of course, they will also count with their private charging at their private facilities. However, in this case, they will need ultra-fast charging at highways so they can continue their journey. It is also interesting to highlight another figure from the European Automobile Manufacturers Association that says, and I'm quoting, that in modern economies, 85% of road freight tonnage is carried over distances of 150 kilometers or less. This tell us why we need a network of public fast and ultra-fast charging facilities in Europe. However, it is true that this kind of infrastructure, they have specific challenges. Let me share with you some of them. Here we have some of them that they are really important in many cases, but I would like to highlight first the planning permission complexity. This is a topic that is happening throughout Europe, and the majority of the developers, they are, let's say, suffering because there are many actors involved with different knowledge and sensibility about this topic of the electrical vehicle charging. Another challenge that is important to highlight, especially because we are today at the Power Summit by Euroelectric, is the topic of the electricity network connection. Regarding this, let me share with you what, in our opinion, should be the attributes that the connection to the grid solution for high power charging should have. First, and this is a must, it should consider the distribution system operator as well as national and international standards and requirements. We are talking about environmental requirements, safety of people and assets requirements, also technical requirements, for example, national grid codes. And the connection to the grid solution for high power charging facilities shall help developers to ease the challenges we have talked before. For example, by using industrialized solutions that allow for shorter deliveries or simplified installation works, or in the case of the operating expenses, thanks to its minimum maintenance requirements. This that we are talking right now has to do with a particular, or let's say like the micro level for a specific high-power charging station. But what will it happen when the uptake of e-mobility really will happen, when we would have many millions of EVs at our roads in Europe? What would it happen with the distribution grid? The solution for it is what is called the grid digitalization, the network digitalization, that also it is known as the smart grid. The smart grid is a distribution grid that has the possibility of adding additional features that would allow the grid operator to manage better the grid in a way that they will allow allow the integration of more distributed energy resources. Distributed energy resources such as more renewable generation, such as storage, self-consumption, but also electrical vehicles. This smart grid is happening already, but where is it happening at the distribution grid? Where is the place where the smart grid is being implemented? The transformer substation is that place, is the core of the smart grid. The transformer substation is the asset at the grid where the operation and the protection of the grid is happening, and where with the smart grid, all the signals, all the communications, all the hardware and software that allows for the smart grid to happen is located. With this, I stop. I'm willing to participate in the debate that is going to take place now, and I give the floor back to Julia. Thank you to all.
Thanks a lot, Helena. Thank you for this really comprehensive overview of why, where, and mostly what the barriers are for much quicker uptake of fast charging. I would like now to move to our panel, the panel of speakers that we have today. So I'll start by introducing all of them to you. So first we have Ismail Ertug, who is member of the European Transport Committee and also Vice President of the European Parliament's Socialist Group. Then we have with us Jesus Lopez. Jesus is head on fast charging deployment for smart mobility at Hyperdola. Then we have with us Christopher Burkhardt, who is president of ChargeUp Europe, Europe's Association for Chargepoint Operators. And last but absolutely not least, we have with us Alexander Junger, who is electrification director in Germany for BP Europe. So welcome all of you. And of course, we also have Yelena, who is joining us back to continue being with us on the panel and to provide your insights for the questions. So we have a few questions that we'd like to now discuss with all of you and hear from all of you your concerns, wishes, and views on this very important topic. So I'll start with the first question, a rather broad one to really understand the different views here. What is the role of fast charging? So how important is it really for the uptake of electric vehicles? And Ismail, we'll start with you. So first of all, the floor to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it's clear that this is of crucial importance for the acceptance of the people. Even now, most of the people, they have a fear of not to find fast charging or charging point when needed. And I guess the deployment of these kind of charging stations is absolutely important, as I said. So normally when we look to the figures, it's the fear or the concern is not justified. 90% or even more, 90% of the people driving per day less than 50 kilometers or not more than 100 kilometers. That shows us the drive to the working place or to the shopping mall, or you know what I mean. That's absolutely feasible if you have your wall box at home. So you don't need that in that moment. But, and there is a but, all those who want to use the car for holiday trips, or who's using the car for longer distances, they want to have these kind of charging points. And therefore, this is, in my eyes, very key. Two legislations are of crucial importance. First, which is the AFIT, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive. I hope that as a regulation, but it's the decision of the European Commission in the end. And the second one, maybe a little bit more important, or the same importance as the AFIT, is the TEN-T, the Trans-European Networks Guidelines, the next one, where we have to deploy, find a way, and support them with money, the charging points along the motorways and the highways, because the people who need these kind of charging spaces and charging points driving there, and therefore I think these two legislations will be of crucial importance for the future.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Ismail. And indeed, we'll have a deeper dive into the policies and the barriers later on the panel. So it was already a great introduction to the key subjects there. I now would like to turn to Jesus. So Jesus, in your view, in Iberdrola's view, how crucial is fast charging for the e-mobility?
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And first of all, I would like to thank Euroelectric and Ormazabal for inviting Iberdrola to discuss this exciting topic. And from my point of view, the massive deployment of fast, super-fast, and ultra-fast charging hubs is key to the acceptance of the electric vehicle by the general public. With a comprehensive Europe-wide network, the infrastructure barrier will be completely overthrown. This movement will accelerate the growth of battery electric vehicles in Europe, given that consumers will see them as one-car family. So it will cover all their needs. The charging hubs helps to make visible how electricity is the most cost-efficient fuel, and it is the most environmentally friendly, always if it is backed by renewable energy. According to our strategy, this requires charging hubs of at least 4 charging points, starting with outlets of 50 kilowatts. Hyperdola is the first company in Spain to provide nationwide coverage with fast chargers. We have one charger every 100 kilometers. And now we are investing more than 150 million to ramp up the commissioning of charging stations in the main Spanish corridors. And to be more precise, we are going to deploy like 5,000 chargers. And every 100 kilometers, we want to install at least 150 kilowatt charger. And then every 200 kilometers, at least one charger of 350 kilowatts. So once the deployment is done, and with the share of the other players, and customers will enjoy a bigger variety of charging services and more competitive prices.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Jesus. And it was good to know that you also covered prices there a little bit. Again, another topic that we'll cover later on the panel. And to finish this round with this first question, Christopher, I'd like to turn to you. What about the view of the charge point operators?
Thank you, Julia. Yes, maybe just very briefly, because I don't know how many people know Charge-Up Europe. We're still very young as an association. So we were founded last year to represent effectively the EV charging operators, as you mentioned, Julia. We've got 14 full members now and a number of ecosystem partners and content partnerships, and we're growing very steadily in membership. I'm also the managing director for Europe for Chargepoint, but today, I think, you know, when I look at how our members think about fast charging, obviously it's absolutely critical in the rollout. And I think one of the things that's important to remember, and I think both Ismail and Elena already mentioned that earlier, is you have to think about the fueling model, and you have to think about the importance of fast charging within that. Because one of the things that happens is when people get into electric vehicles, they suddenly realize that there are many more opportunities to refuel their vehicle when they're actually just parked and it's not an activity that they need to think about. And what we see today is that that's a very high percentage because at work, in supermarkets, at home, there are opportunities to charge, but it's also because a lot of people who started with electric vehicles obviously had opportunity to charge, and the numbers back that up. You're 6 to 7 times more likely to buy an electric vehicle if you can charge your vehicle at work. And obviously home charging is super important too, especially early on with early adopters. Now, the fact of the matter is that as we ramp up, and we're in the middle of an explosive growth for EVs, the fast charging opportunities are already very important for people who travel long distance, and for people who are outside of their normal sort of parking area, if you want, where they can charge, but even more so because they just open up many more use cases for those people who don't have a place to charge at home, as Elena was mentioning, or people who just don't use their car for commuting and therefore don't go to work, or their employers don't have workplace charging. So extremely important to make sure that we roll out an efficient network of high power charging across Europe to create basically better alternatives. And also because we shouldn't forget that we're talking about cars and vans now, but trucks are coming, long distance buses are coming, and that fast charging infrastructure is important. And the challenges that we, of course, need to look at then are some of the issues that Elena mentioned around permitting and access and how to deploy quickly, but also around how to make the fueling stations of the future attractive for a mix of different fuels. Because in the end, for electric vehicles, even at a high power charger, it's still a park and charge model, which means people will park their vehicle, they'll plug it into a high power charging station, and then they'll go to a retail environment for a short duration, but the car will be parked in that space for longer than a vehicle would be parked that's refueling an internal combustion engine. So that much, I think, for us for now, Julia.
Thanks a lot, Christopher. And thanks also for reminding us, actually, that we're not only talking about cars, there's also trucks and a whole load of other road vehicles to think about. So that's crystal clear from all of you how fast charging is, ultra fast charging is really important to the acceptance of electric vehicles and to the various uses that we have. Now, because it's so important, and I think as TNE, we also very much agree with that, people really want to be able, when they need to charge very fast, the question is, how quickly can we roll out this easy-to-use, fast and ultra-fast charging stations across Europe? And to start with this question, I first would like to turn to Alexander, as I know that BP is very active in this area. So how fast can BP accomplish that?
Yeah, thank you, Julia. Indeed, this year we are building a lot of ultra-fast charging stations, in particular in Germany. Since the beginning of December last year, we've built and commissioned about 35 high-power charge sites or ultra-fast charge sites in Germany. And at the end of this year, we want to be at about 120 public ultra-fast charge sites in Germany. So based on our experience of the first 35 sites, I would say we need between 6 to 9 months to build and commission a charge site. And we have declined to build a number of sites where it got clear to us that we would need clearly over 12 months. And I'm counting the time here from launching the network grid connection application to commissioning of the site. And what really drives this timeline of 6 to 9 months, or in some cases it would be over 12, is building permits and the medium voltage grid connection, which you typically need for ultra-fast charging. And building permits, well, you might ask now, why do we need building permits? Because in particular in Germany, charging infrastructure should not require building permits. However, very often, depending on the municipality, etc., the substation then requires a building permit. So not the charger, but the substation. But without the substation, you cannot operate a high power charger. So then you're back in the game for the building permit. And this takes quite long. And I would say without the building permit and without the medium voltage grid connection taking so long, we could probably halve the time required.
Thank you, Alexander. That's really interesting to hear, and that comes as a message again and again, whether it's slow or fast charging, that the permitting procedures and all this administrative stuff is something that's really important to cut if we want faster uptake. Thank you, Christopher. What about Charge Up Europe View and your members that you have, all the different companies? How fast are they, or can they build these stations across Europe?
Yeah, so I think I'll tag on to what Alexander was saying, because obviously, Alexander echoed a lot of points that typically, members of our association would have. I think the point is, the market is there, the players are there. There are many new players that entered. There are many players that are already in the fueling business. And so the rollout could happen extremely quickly. But there are still some challenges, as both Alexander mentioned and Elena referred to earlier, that sort of create friction for that market to be rolled out very efficiently. And so I think one of the key things to recognize is that until now, legislation has kind of failed to create an adequate environment in which that rollout can happen as quickly as we would want it to be. And I think the four sort of major barriers that we see are, one, access to suitable locations. So obviously high traffic sort of areas, because these sites will be some of the better sites today, ultimately, in terms of that, as I mentioned earlier, there are other alternatives to charge as well as fast charge, but still the density is going to be where the traffic sits. Then there's the time to connect to the grid and the permitting rules that Alexander mentioned. There is also the lack of transparent and open permit allocation procedures in some countries. So very different from one country, sometimes even from one region to another, which makes it very difficult to have certainty around the speed for rollout. And then the last one is really around the way in which tenders are organized, in terms of transparency, in terms of openness when it comes to allocating concessions. So this is obviously extremely important to our members because, as I mentioned, in any market that is being disrupted, there are many new players that come in. There are existing players that are looking to expand. And so it's very important that these allocations are done in an open and transparent and sort of fair manner. So those are the four barriers really that are there that need to be addressed. And then I think the other one that I haven't mentioned yet in terms of barriers to the speed of rollout is obviously also funding. And that goes back to what Ismail was talking about in terms of, basically the legislative frameworks going from the national plans that are being put out today that are looking at how to finance the Green Deal, how to finance the recovery, and the allocation of funding to electric mobility and to the rollout of infrastructure is going to be key there in terms of making financing available. And frankly, making public financing available attracts enormous amounts of private financing, which then, because it creates a layer of certainty for investors and also for consumer confidence when it comes to the rollout of electric mobility. So those are some of the points that I think are really core to our members' thinking.
Thank you. All very clear points. And I really hope that there's many today who are listening who actually represent the different decision-making process that do take note and will see improvement. So, Juliana, maybe turning to you to see if there's anything you would like to add. Lots of points were already said in this regard. But on the speed of rolling out fast chargers, what else should we consider in your view?
Thank you, Julia. I mean, I could add to what my colleagues they have said. A positive message that I would like to share with you that has to do, as was mentioned by Alexander and also by Christopher, the weight of the transformer station, or the importance of the transformer station when we are talking about high power charging. I would like to highlight that in Europe we have an industry that is worldwide recognized by its quality and by the capability of innovation, an industry for the electrical equipment, electronics equipment, for the chargers as well, and that has the capabilities to deliver fast fit-for-purpose solutions for the grid connection. So let's say that in that part, let's say from the point of the view of the hardware of the charging station, this is something that we are covered. And in general, what I believe that we, based on our experience working with different CPOs, one important point in order to speed up the rolling of high power charging is the collaboration in between the different stakeholders. I mean, different actors of the ecosystem. I mean, the CPO with the DSO, with the manufacturers, with the installers, with the authorities involved in all the permitting process. The earlier, the better, let's say. And this is of course, always, and we maybe we'll talk later about regulation and policies, but this is a good point, to start with in order to speed up the rolling out.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Well, I think it's really time to turn to regulation and policies as a really important block. We're here speaking with you today at the time when the European Commission is busy doing the last touches to their huge climate package coming out in July. And as Mr. Ertug already said, some key pieces of legislation directly relevant to what we're discussing today. So RFIT, or European Infrastructure Law, and 10T, which is really crucial to having charging all across our motorways, will be reviewed as part of this package. So I would like to now turn to all the various representatives to first outline what role do you think policy will play, and outline, if you like, your wish list for the decision makers on this. And then I will turn to Mr. Ertug to respond a bit and present the view of the European Parliament. So I'd like to start with Jesus. Jesus, imagine it's Christmas. What is your wish list?
Well, all my colleagues have already mentioned all the burdens that makes the permits for deploying the stations. I think in Spain we have a dubious record of ranging from 6 months to 2 years for deploying a station, which is quite frustrating. So we are proposing some new rules to accelerate the permitting process, like simplifying and direct authorization instead of following all the process that my colleagues have already mentioned in the municipality level, in the regional level, because of the legalization of the installation, and also in the national level for the road administration, which is also quite different from region to region. So what we need is an agile, even an homogeneous legislation that overthrow all the formation breaks. So one field we are exploring that is the project of strategic interest. So once one deployment is called strategic for the nation or for Europe, like the connecting European facilities, which we have one, perhaps we can flexibilize all the criteria and reduce the timeline, as we have already mentioned. And also for the regulator, I would like to ask to design incentives that make this stable in the process. So give us a proper horizon on how much we have to invest and what is the share of investment depending on the technology. So it's more or less my wish list.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I'm sure the colleagues will build up on that, but that's a very good start. So Alexander, going to you next. What are the key priorities from your side?
Yeah, thank you. So I think what my colleague has said makes sense. Don't want to repeat that, but want to add 2 points of importance to it. One is policymakers should recognize that ultra-fast charging is not only important to the breakthrough of electric vehicles, but that ultra-fast charging is also more expensive, and ultra-fast chargers are more expensive to build than slower chargers. So policymakers should make it more attractive to CPOs to build ultra-fast chargers. For instance, by ultra-fast charging getting a higher greenhouse gas emission credits multiplier than slow charging. That would be really helpful and could really support ultra-fast charging, which in turn could really support the breakthrough of electrical vehicles. And my second request is, please make sure that building charging infrastructure doesn't need building permits. We're not talking about building a skyscraper here. We're talking about a few chargers and maybe a substation. And to give you an example, in Germany, we recently required a building permit for a substation. And then the authorities asked us to provide a sound insulation expert report assessing sound emissions or noise emissions which might come out of that substation. But we were not talking about an urban location. We were talking about an Aral truck stop at the exit of a main highway, Autobahn in German, and it was located right in a forest. So we really couldn't understand why we would need a sound insulation expert report, but had to comply with that requirement in order to obtain the building permit, and it simply cost time. And if that got simplified, if charging infrastructure and the substation was free of building permit requirements, we could deploy chargers much faster.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing this experience with us today. It's frustrating to see sometimes how regulation hasn't caught up with the modern technologies and some developments. So that's certainly one to note. So Elena, over to you. What in your view are the key policy impacts that you'd like to stress?
I mean, I don't like to repeat it, but regarding permitting, for example, one thing that could be interesting is, I mean, of course, to make it simpler, but maybe to make it uniform at least. I mean, we have experiences with some of our customers where from one municipality to another municipality, in one municipality that permit is some kind of self-declaration that you submit via internet. But for the neighboring municipality, maybe you have to submit tons of paper that takes a lot of time and delays the go live of the station. At the same time, I understand because sometimes, I mean, we are talking that these facilities, they are many times located at highways, and highways they are crossing by in many cases through rural areas. Therefore, municipalities, the local authorities there, they have not many resources, or they have not the knowledge or the sensibility. So maybe one interesting measure could be some kind of common rules, practices, formats, something that could help them, because it's true that it's not in their willing to delay anything. So uniform practices, that could be something that could be helpful. And also I would like to, if I had to my Christmas gift list, something interesting, because in the end we rely on electricity. And we rely on grids. And with the take-up of e-mobility, the distribution system operators have a role to play. And as we were saying, being these facilities located many times in highways, as service areas of highways, sometimes the grid is not as strong as it should be. So some kind of regulatory certainty for the network operators, so in the way that their investments in making the grid smarter, that we know that it could help to integrate more charging facilities, or in the renewables generation investments, this kind of support from the regulatory part, I think would be interesting, and be something that we come into as a consequence, into the e-mobility and ultra-fast charging deployment.
Thanks, Helena. Thanks a lot. And thanks also in particular raising an area around grids and grid strengthening. I mean, the whole economy is relying on electrification. We're talking about vehicles, but there's also green hydrogen production, right? There's also heating. So actually, I would say that smartening the grids and strengthening the grids is really a no-brainer and no regrets for the entire economy. So thanks for raising that as well. Christopher, over to you. Anything to add? Maybe else on permitting? I think it's now crystal clear, the key message to policymakers. So over to you.
I don't envy you, Ismail. You're getting a lot of requests from all of us here. But I think let me try and summarize a little bit. I think so. First of all, Julia, you mentioned it, and I think everybody here mentioned it. AFIT and TNT are the most important pieces of legislation as regards fast charging, right? For us as the charging industry, obviously the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive is key, but in the case of fast charging sites, it's really around what's happening with AFIT, and there's a huge focus on that. And then 10T is very critical. And I think the key thing is that today we have a patchwork of national legislation and different rules, and I think it's really important to create guidelines that, one, encourage private investment into fast charge infrastructure, and two, also that set out some principles for member states to develop sort of site allocation strategies and plans that effectively make it easier to roll out fast charging. So for us, there's 4 main areas that are really critical. And then there's a general point around AFIT that I'll make. One is national site allocation plans. So I think it's important to require member states to identify locations for fast charging infrastructure in order to ensure that the development then is channeled towards those sites, and that those sites are clearly identified as locations for fast charge rollout. Secondly, open and non-discriminatory procedures when it comes to public and competitive procurement processes, how those are organized, in, that they are non-discriminatory, that they are open to all actors to participate in. I think that is very critical. I think I've spent too many years in the renewable energy industry developing power plants also along highways to unfortunately know that permitting procedures will always be local, and that there is not much that can be done around that, but at least to ensure that the procedures and the guidelines are harmonized, I think is very important. Thirdly, contract duration. So one of the key things, Alexander just mentioned it, especially early on, the utilization of fast charge sites will not be optimal at first. And providing long periods, especially early on, 15-year concessions is what we would say is a good standard to look for, is really critical, because the return on investment of one of those sites is really strongly linked to the length of which you can exploit it. And I think that makes a big difference to investors. And then the last point in terms of wants is just ensuring from a physical space point of view that the configurations are taken into account for this park and charge model that needs to so for fast charging, right, where the car stays in the space where the charger is for the duration of the charge, alongside fueling, alongside hydrogen. And the final general point I want to make is, we talked about AFIT. Ismail, you mentioned the word regulation. And actually, our sector has gone one step further, because one of the issues that electricity as a fuel for vehicles has is that today we're lumped in with alternative fuels. But really what we're talking about, all of us here, is the mainstream of electric vehicles. And when you look at how long it takes to revise legislation, what we actually would want is an ambitious step forward to say, let's have a specific regulation that covers electric vehicle charging as its own, basically mainstream source of fuel that requires very specific sort of build out for infrastructure. And fast charge is obviously a big piece of that. And I think we've sent out a letter as an association. I won't take up too much time on that, but I think it's a really important piece for us to say, we are now seen as mainstream. We need to have regulations, legislation that covers the sector in a manner where we can build it out to a mainstream source of fuel over the coming years.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for this very comprehensive overview as well, and kind of putting it all in a nice shelves. So Ismail, I'd like to turn to you now. We of course know you are not holding the pen in the European Commission, but you will have a crucial role for all of these pieces of regulation as they go via the European Parliament. So I'll give you the floor to react to what you have heard from everyone on the panel.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much to all our experts. I listened very carefully, and for us as policymakers, it's important to know what are the burdens, what are the difficulties, in particular for the industry. And all those who know me, they know that I'm listening to everybody, and I will proceed with this. And I have learned so many things in the last 12 years in the European Parliament, being member of the European Parliament. When it comes to the difficulties, it's another topic, but that shows me once again how weak we are when it comes to digitalization in the European Union, and in particular in several member states. All those, what has been mentioned, I'm sure, and I believe in it, could be solved by a good way of digitalization. Digital solutions could be done, in particular if you have some difficulties like in Germany, for example, where you have a federal system where you have at least 3 levels of rule makers. I think Christopher was the one who said in particular you need the permit on the regional level, but you need upper levels in order to have some harmonization. But the harmonization is normally not given. You have different states in Germany, for example, with different regulations, and that brings me to a point as a European politician to say, okay, we as the European Union, we can set the framework, but in the end, the member states, they have to find a way how to make it feasible. And that brings me to the biggest concern what I have when it comes to the member states, to be honest. As I said in the beginning, the AFID, for example, where I expect a regulation, but I have heard that they will come once again as a directive. But okay, directive or regulation, in the end, it's up to the European Parliament and the parliamentarian to make it as strong as possible. Where we need, in particular, where we need for sure is, or what we need for sure is binding targets for all the member states. I don't want to reiterate the story from 2013, back in 2013, where I was the shadow rapporteur for the first AFID, Clean Power for Transport was the name at that time. The European Commission, they put an annex with 2 annexes with clear quantitative numbers for all the member states for all charging points, not only electric, also for fuels and CNG, LNG, H2, and so on. That was the backbone of this legislation. It has been destroyed at that time by the member states, in particular by my own. Sorry for saying that, but it was Germany, backed by the automotive sector at that time. And that time was before diesel scandal. It was before Fridays for Future. It was before Greta Thunberg and so on. The pressure was not there. And they did what they always did, throw it away and make some national action plans. And that was the death for this legislation. And we lost 5 to 6 years at least on European level to deploy these kind of important infrastructure. And now all those who had at that time blocked that legislation are crying around and asking the European Union and requesting from the European Union infrastructure. So anyway, but this is politics. We are used to do this. That does mean, once back to the legislation, AFID has to be with binding targets for all the member states. And I think it was Alexander who mentioned the issue of financing. Within this pandemic, we agreed on a so-called recovery fund. As you all know, the recovery fund gives money, the opportunity for the member states to invest in future technologies. And I really expect that the member states should use out of their share of this recovery money for this investments. And we all know if public money is there, private money will follow. So that could give us an uptake on the infrastructure. Third topic, and when it comes to the figures, when it comes to the initial report by the European Commission, I really expect an ambitious number of infrastructure. The initiative report, what I made 2018 in the Parliament, we put some figures in it, and I know from the European Commission they are expecting 1 million. Let me look to the numbers. Yes, 1 million charging points by 2025 and 2.9 million by 2030. Where I think this is not ambitious enough. And I think Julia has reiterated the figures. The uptake of electric vehicles, we see this could fly, and it's going to fly. And we need ambitious targets, in particular, even from the European Commission side. And as I said, finally, as rapporteur for the Sustainable and Smart Mobility strategy, I put that in. And I guess all those who read already my paper know it, how much emphasis I put into this special topic on infrastructure, how to make it possible, how to accelerate the process. This is my firm belief that this has to be delivered in order to reach, in particular, and to achieve the CO2 emission targets, or let me say the climate law targets, by being clear climate or emission neutral by 2050. Without this, I think we won't be able to solve the problems on the mode of road. And road does mean electric vehicles, and we have to deliver it as policymakers.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Mr. Ertug. I can't agree more with one particular point you raised around the importance of having member states here on board this time round. We won't have strong policies without their support. I only hope that as Germany today is the leader in terms of the electric market in Europe, because so many people and companies in Germany buy and need electric cars, that they will have a different view this time, and they will really support ambitious proposals and targets across Europe. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I'd like to thank you all for all of your input, for all of your really interesting views, experiences, and examples. I'm afraid this is all we have time for today to discuss on this topic. I think we've heard so much of really interesting context and input that all of our listeners, I hope, can take on board and not just learn something, but also change something. And I'm especially thinking of the decision and policymakers who are listening to us today. We've heard that fast charging is paramount to the acceptance of electric vehicles in Europe, but I'm sure also globally and beyond, and that actually needs to be just as seamless as fueling the cars as we travel around Europe today. We've heard about the numerous barriers that are there, and I really have to highlight that there hasn't been one speaker who hasn't mentioned the issue around cumbersome administrative procedures and slow and sometimes almost ridiculous permitting procedures across Europe. So I really hope that that's something that we can all take on board and do it better as we rebuild Europe. And now there's so much economic recovery going on. So we have an opportunity to change the procedures we have in place. But we also have heard from all the speakers about the importance and the opportunities of what we need policy to deliver to make sure we are where we want to be, which is zero emissions mobility future, with some of the key laws out there for grabs and for improvement around alternative fuels, infrastructure, TEN-T, and so forth. It's really time to, this time round, to put infrastructure back on track and make sure that everyone across Europe, whether you are a family in Romania, a man with a van in London, or a skier in Sweden, can have access to seamless and hassle-free charging, and especially have access to fast charging to make your life just a little bit faster. Thanks so much, all of you, for attention. I'd like to thank all our speakers, but also Euroelectric as well for inviting me to moderate this session, and I hope you all have a great rest of the summit. Thank you.